Welcome to the International College of Dentists, Chronicles of Outstanding Leaders in Dentistry. It's my pleasure today to have an interview with Dr. Caswell A. Evans, who currently serves as the Director of the National Oral Health Initiative in the Office of the Surgeon General, the U.S. Public Health Service, Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Evans is a dentist, a dental public health specialist, and has held numerous leadership roles in public health, public policy, oral health, and education. To just name a few, he was the Chief of Dental Services and Director of King County Health Services Division in Seattle-King County, Department of Public Health. He was the Assistant Director of Health Services and Director of Public Health Programs and Services at the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services. He chaired the first ever Community Preventive Services Task Force and was the project director and executive editor of the first United States Surgeon General's report on oral health. Welcome, Dr. Evans. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. As always, it's always good to start at the beginning. I know that you are the only child in the family. Could you tell me a little bit about your mother and father and what it was like growing up?
I grew up in Harlem, in New York City, in a wonderful time, in a period where Harlem was a wonderful place. We had things to do, we had parks, and we had children all over the place. So it was a very active place, and at that time, very safe. It's a little different from the experience one has today. My father was in business, and my mother worked for the New York City Department of Public Welfare.
So you got the public health or public service aspect.
I think that was part of my introduction, at least into that concept, indeed. And it was a great place to be. I didn't realize until I'd gotten off into college that Harlem was considered a ghetto or was somehow or another special. It was home to me. It was wonderful. Right up the street was the old Polo Grounds before the Giants moved to San Francisco, and right across the river was Yankee Stadium. And so we spent a lot of time going to ball games. And one of the highlights in those days, the Giants would let the neighborhood kids into the Polo Grounds in the bottom half of the seventh inning, in the home seventh. So the gates would open, we'd go on in, right. And often the crowds would be rushing out, and we'd go in and get the box seats. And sometimes the score was already 10-1. Other times it was a tie ball game, and you got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more innings of baseball. So it was nice.
No, it sounds like a wonderful place to be. Mm-hmm. Now, who in those early years enticed you to consider dentistry? Because obviously your mother and father were in different types of careers.
Yes. It came about in a way that was utterly unplanned. Again, being an active child in Harlem, we had all kinds of games, and in doing one of those games I got injured. And
which game was that?
We were playing stoop ball. And the rules of the game were that if you hit the ball on the fire escape, it was sort of hit and go get. So you had to go up on the fire escape to get the ball. You only had one ball, and whoever put it up there had to go get it. Coming off the fire escape, I fell. Mm-hmm. And fell in such a way that I hit the teeth in my maxilla and didn't break them, but they shoved back up in the bone.
Okay.
So That resulted in several years of orthodontic exposure and treatment. And while I was going through that, I began to take note. I said, Joe, this is all right. This is very nice. Now, part of that, though, is I had already developed an interest in health in that my mother's adoptive father was a physician. And he was an old school physician. He did house calls, and even at a more advanced age, you know, that was his calling. If someone needed him, he would do house calls. So I was very much interested in just being in his space, being in his office, and seeing how he spent his time. But I never really liked the idea that in the evenings when the family were together and we were having a nice occasion, the phone would ring and something would happen and he'd have to put on his hat and coat and leave. And I'd just say, that, you know, yeah, that was unsettling to me. So when I had this exposure with the orthodontist, it seemed to me that was a nice match of the two. And at a very early age, therefore, I began to develop this interest in dentistry.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of, you know, both personal and family,
yes,
you know,
true.
Stimuli to do that. It's interesting how that happens, though, where you're actually, as a child growing up, and you are able to then to look outside of yourself into something that's around you and say, this is something that I would like to do.
And of course it goes on when you have no perception that that's happening. It's part of the formulation, but you have to look back to realize that these things were in fact going on, and you were aware of it. Well,
you left Harlem to go to college. You went to a small men's college at the time, Franklin and Marshall, and then went back to New York to Columbia University School of Dental and Oral Surgery. Tell me what it was like being a young black male in dentistry at that time. Were you the only one in your class?
That was tough. I was the only one in my class. I was the only one through Columbia probably in a 7-year period during that time. So at least at Columbia at that point in time, there were just no other African Americans. There were 2 African Americans on the faculty in oral surgery, and I got to know them over time, and one particularly became very supportive of me and sort of looked out, and I remember on one occasion when I seemed to be particularly stressed out, he gave me the keys to his winter cabin. He was a weekend ski patrol and had a winter cabin, and said, you know, you look as though you need a break. Here are the keys to the cabin. Here's where it is. Go off and relax. But it made it very difficult because forming the types of relationships, the types of supportive environments became very difficult in that setting. We certainly had friends, but the types of bonds that help one another get through rigorous academic environments was very, very difficult, very difficult.
Well, you made it through, and you obviously really succeeded because your leadership approach showed through in dental school. You were the senior class president.
That's right. That's right.
And you needed support to have that role as well. So
well, in time that developed, but it didn't come to my attention, for example, until years later that many of my classmates were in one fraternity or another, and they had copies of old exams, or they had opportunities to be in laboratory settings. They had situations where professors would come by the fraternities and help them in projects. And I didn't know that any of that existed and was pretty much excluded from it. But I think things are different now, and hopefully students don't suffer from that type of exclusion.
No, well, I can understand what you experienced. I think that oftentimes looking back, you see and say that that builds character. And it's really clear to me that it somehow built character in yourself. In fact, you took a very unusual track after dental school, something that most young people graduating dental school weren't doing at that time. You went into a hospital rotating internship at the Zoller Memorial Dental Clinic in Chicago. What made you pursue hospital training?
Well, that's an interesting story. It really was because of the development of an interest in disease prevention from a very early point in my dental school career. And it began to dawn on me that coming from Harlem, being at Columbia, as we were being instructed in gold restoration, I began to wonder, well, are there ways where one can prevent the need for the restoration in the first place? Can we do this a different way? So I began to ask questions along those lines, and the faculty at the time, I think, were indulgent of some of my questions, but frankly, probably didn't know what the answers were. And long story made short, I was sort of told, if you go down this hall and turn right and then turn left and go through some old dusty doors and go down the end of that corridor, you'll find someone named Erwin Mandel, and he can answer those questions. And I did that. And Dr. Mandel said, listen, you were right on the right path. The questions you are asking are bona fide questions. Take them seriously. I will help you try to answer as many of them as I can. And they fall into this area of public health. So he got me thinking about public health. And I began to think, even then, that one way of perhaps doing dentistry better was to link several offices or clinics together, combine the resources, have common laboratories, shared administrative systems, and to develop a new administrative way to provide dental services in a more economic and a more efficient setting. Right. So I began to develop this interest in administration. So I went to Zoller because it was a hospital-based dental internship, and promised some exposure in terms of the administration of dentistry, at least into a larger setting, because it was so well integrated. There were other internships that were not nearly as well integrated in the hospital.
But that's interesting that you chose going to a hospital, which is usually an acute care center, for a question you posed, which was a chronic disease. Right. But you were looking at it from an administrative point of view, where you brought the different disciplines together.
That's right. Now, in reality, it was more dream than actual.
You got a lot of medicine out of
it. I did. I got a lot of exposure there. But the director of the program at Zoller at University of Chicago, again, understood my interest, and he was really then the one who particularly supported my pursuing those interests by going to a school of public health.
You went on right immediately afterwards.
Yes,
you probably had to apply as soon as you came into the internship to University of Michigan for a master's in public health and residency.
That's right. That's right. And the master's in public health, residency following on top of that. And those experiences confirmed my sense that this was my direction. This is where I should be. This is where the good fit for me was. And I've gone on from there and have never regretted any of those steps along the way.
Well, you know, I think you probably, of all the folks that I know in public health, have been the most efficient in entering public health practice, because after you finished your master's and residency program, you sort of spread into a career that has covered local, state, and national public health programs. You started with your first position in public health as the Chief of Dental Services and Director of Research and Evaluation for HealthCo Incorporated in Soul City, North Carolina, and running a comprehensive health center at that point. So that you jumped right into it.
Well, actually, it was a little different than that. It was planning for the development of a comprehensive health center.
It was the beginning, launching that health center.
It was one of those experiences that you get into when you are wide-eyed, maybe even wild-eyed.
Bushy-tailed.
You know, the world is just fraught with endless possibilities. Soul City was a city that was conceived by Floyd McKissick, who was a past activist in the civil rights movements. And along the lines of Columbia, Maryland, and Reston, Virginia, and Mound Bayou, Mississippi, was a new town development, and was funded under legislation that was passed during the Nixon administration. The concepts being to take some of the growing population pressure off of current urban centers and create brand new urban centers and new town developments. And part of that was a proposal that was funded by then OEO as it transitioned, as it then transformed into Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, DHEW, to develop a 2 county-wide comprehensive health center that was going to be the health component of this new town development. So the comprehensive health center was to be located in and serve Warren and Vance counties, which were very, very poor in North Carolina, and I was there to put together the dental component of that and do the research and evaluation component, because there was a lot of interest, particularly on the part of University of North Carolina, to do research in the area.
And to monitor the health services.
Yeah, it was a great experience. A friend of mine also grew up in Harlem, who also was at Columbia University in the medical school when I was there. And at that point in time had gone to Harlem Hospital. I enticed him to come down to North Carolina also, and he became the medical director.
Oh, so you had a family critical mass there.
We had a wonderful time. And in fact, by the time I left, we had a temporary arrangement in a double-wide trailer, but it was a functioning health center in that setting. And very soon thereafter, and even still today, the health center that we planned in terms of blueprint is now open and operational on the same site. Oh yes, and very, very active. In fact,
have you been back there recently?
Oh yeah, I went through there. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago now.
This is almost 30 years.
Yeah, and some of the same staff, because we hired local people
and young people.
Young people are now still there as administrators and leaders of one thing or another. So
that must make you feel good.
Wonderful, absolutely, absolutely. So it was from there that I went then to Seattle, King County, Washington.
But what lured you to leave at that time? Because it sounded like you seeded it, and it was your baby, in fact.
It was a very intense experience. I lived on site. And the project was down a 3-mile-long dirt road. Many of the families that lived on the dirt road did not have their own water supply, much less plumbing. Everybody had outhouses, and you'd see the children in the morning with the yokes and the buckets of water on either end of the yoke, because they had no running water in their homes. And when we got to the point of establishing the interim health center, and it was up and going, and we had the permanent health center on the blueprints, it just felt like it was time to go. Yeah, it was. That was reward enough, and it was so much fun. I wanted to let somebody else enjoy it as well.
Well, then you went from the East Coast to the West Coast, and starting up north in Seattle, and then down to Los Angeles. Tell me a little bit about those roles where you actually concurrently held positions overseeing the dental services, but also oversaw all of health services.
Yeah, I went to the Seattle King County Department of Public Health, having been recruited there to be the chief of dental services. And they had a small program. They didn't have much cohesion to it, and the director of the health department said he didn't know exactly what to do, but he wanted something better than what they had. I made a lot of changes, grew the program, it developed very nicely, and I was very pleased with it. And because of the change and the growth of that area, when I got there, it was Seattle, capital S, hyphen, King County, lowercase k.
Okay.
But as the population grew, King County began to also have its capital K. And The budget arrangement had been that the way the combined county was funded, Seattle was very much the leader in terms of decision making, and their decisions and budgetary commitments pretty much then committed the county to follow suit.
Right.
And the county began to develop their own particular interests and public health needs, some of which didn't match Seattle. So there was tension there. Long story made short, the result was that the department got reconfigured. And in that reconfiguration, I was approached and asked if I would, in effect, become the director of the division in which I was sitting, because the director of that division was retiring, and help with the transitioning of the organization from sort of a structure like this to a structure like that. And I said, well, that'd be fine. It'd be a great experience to do for 6 or 7 months. And at the end of that period, although I was administering the division, I still maintained the dental piece. The director again came to me and said, you did a pretty credible job. Would you be interested in being a candidate for one of the new division director slots as we've now reconfigured the department? And I thought about it a little bit, and I said, that'd be wonderful. As long as I can keep the dental piece, I would be pleased to be a candidate. I was ultimately selected as the director of the King County division of the department. So that really then put me on a more permanent basis as director of basically that portion of the department, and it allowed me to see public health in a much broader context, but also how oral health and dental health fit into that context. And I found very soon that from the perspective of a division director, I could do things for oral health much more easily and much more effectively than I could simply sitting in the oral health seat. So I enjoyed that. I learned an awful lot. Did that for about 6 years.
Well, but you are one of the few dentists that has served in that kind of role, right, overseeing all of the health activities for a department. Was it difficult in some cases? You said it was easier to put oral health into the context, but were there some difficulties in actually being looked at as being biased towards oral health and incorporating some of these services, or imbalancing the services across the many needs of the population?
At times, but I recognized early on that anyone sitting in that seat has a professional area of interest or expertise, and so at some point in time, invariably, whoever sits in that seat biases towards their particular area of interest. If it was a public health nurse, if it was a pediatrician, right, what have you, there is always that sense of leaning. And I think that that's a given. I found very early on that there was rarely was there an instance that was an issue was raised that how can a dentist make this decision? I think the issue was more what are the nature of the decisions that are made, and what are the outcomes of those decisions, and what is the leadership, as opposed to is the leadership being provided by a nurse, is being provided by a dentist, is being provided by a physician. I think it's just a matter of the nature of the leadership and decisions and the outcome. And as long as the leadership and decisions or outcome are acceptable, I frankly think that it's very workable, and people are prepared to accept competent leadership from a variety of areas of expertise.
Well, we're going to get into a lot of areas in which you have taken leadership, but let me just stop here and say, how would you describe your leadership approach and your style? Because you obviously have experienced it from many different perspectives.
I always tried to make my position and viewpoint clear to those with whom I worked, and particularly those who work for me. If I had a viewpoint, I would share that viewpoint, and if I didn't have a viewpoint and I clearly was in a quandary, I would make that known. I always encouraged input and comment, and always tried to recruit the brightest people I could find, and recruit folks not necessarily for their immediate support of me, but people who were prepared to be part of the team, but also think independently and bring new viewpoints to the table. My approach was to try to have an open discussion of the critical issues, the varying viewpoints, but make it clear that in the final analysis it was not going to be a group decision, it was going to be my decision. And my approach always was to make decisions that I thought were the best to be made, and ones that I could really wrap around and support, because if it was criticized or if there was a problem, my justification for making that decision couldn't be that, well, so-and-so thought that that was the right thing to do, or this group thought was the right thing to do,
and you're following it.
Right. When that time comes, it's your decision, and you've got to support it. And sometimes you go with the popular sentiment, and sometimes you don't. But in the final analysis, it's a decision that you've got to stand for and represent. That's one facet of it, but I think for me that was an important facet of it.
Well, you've also, within your career, shown that you've taken the initiative to push the frontier, push the envelope. And some examples of initiatives that you undertook when you were in Los Angeles, for example, is the Great Beginnings for Black Babies campaign, which was encouraging pregnant African American women to not only seek prenatal care, but to seek it continuously, right. So that there was a support base there. And you founded Public Health Week in order to market public health and the public's health and everything associated with it, which is now a national recognized week. And I'd like to highlight this next one that you founded, which is the Health and Faith Coalition of Greater Los Angeles, which is now seen nationally as well, that emerged through the American Public Health Association. Tell me about the most challenging of these, or any others, and what the rewards have been, because these were not easy things to put forth, either in concept or acceptance when you look across different populations, or marrying two sectors that had not been married before, like health and the faith community.
Right. To pick out one is a very difficult thing to do, because they're each so unique, and they each are kind of standalone in my mind. But if we just think about the Public Health and Faith Community Coalition of Greater Los Angeles, part of the challenge in Los Angeles is immense diversity, just tremendous diversity, with more, in many instances, more people of certain nations in the county of Los Angeles than currently reside in the capital city of that nation. Many of these populations in toto, or in large part, wish not to be discovered for a variety of reasons. Many are insular just because of social concerns. Maybe it's just a language barrier. So, for example, under the conditions of needing to have a large-scale food recall or immunization campaign, the issue and challenge always was, how do we reach these communities? First, do we know where they are, and how do we reach them? Part of the way of reaching them was a realization that every one of these communities has some form of faith expression. It could be a healing circle, it could be an shaman, it could be a medicine man, it could be the preacher, it could be the rabbi, whatever it is. And that these are leaders in the community. They know the language, they know the people, they're trusted. And so part of getting the message to the communities was working through these faith representatives. but also recognizing that each faith has as a fundamental value health, good mental health,
right,
healthy souls, healthy bodies. Every one of them preaches good nutrition. And so, and the list goes on. When you think about the messages coming from the faith community and line them up with the messages of the public health community, there's a great deal of consistency there. So we pulled together a coalition to share our strengths and also to help different communities that had specific health needs. You know, we incorporated at that time Healthy People 2000 and the objectives that were being attempted for Healthy People 2000 to see which congregations were interested in which types of objectives and how could we as a health department help them achieve those objectives. Or if a congregation here was interested in one objective and another congregation was interested in the same objective, getting them together so they could share resources.
But were the various groups within the faith community surprised to be contacted by the health department? Was this the first time the health departments reached out to them?
This was the first time, and there was a bit of surprise, but I was very pleased that there was no real reluctance once the initial shock of surprise wore off. I think they all recognized that we had a very strong set of mutual interests and that we could each help one another in terms of where we wanted to go. And so there was a great deal of support, great deal of interest, and it just took off.
Well, it definitely did take off and is now, as you know well, being promulgated at the highest levels of the nation as an opportunity for us to work together. Well, your legacy includes many things, but one of the many is a succession of successful water fluoridation campaigns in Seattle, Los Angeles, just to name a few of the big cities. And you provided consultation to the British House of Parliament and to Ireland, and I'm sure many other places as well. What advice would you give to those that are about to embark upon water fluoridation campaigns? What are the secrets to your success here?
Well, one of the more recent developments, I think, is the Internet. And I think there's a great opportunity to share information on the Internet and to communicate on the Internet. One of the challenges in developing a coalition in support of fluoridation is how do you communicate and keep everybody involved? Well, with the Internet now, which was something that we really didn't have in the most recent campaigns that I was in, or the Internet was more in its infancy.
Right.
I would advise using that as a source for communication. The principles of fluoridation campaigns really haven't changed that much. I think they have to be viewed very much from the perspective of a political campaign. Even if the outcome is an administrative decision or a decision by a city manager or a mayor or
and not a vote.
And not a vote or a city council, you still get to that point. You still get to that decision-making process through political means. And so you really have to understand the political process and be prepared to work it, and not just assume that because you get a couple of physicians and a couple of dentists and some other community leaders that stand on high and say this is a good thing to do, you just can't expect it's going to happen as simply as that.
Any political aspirations, given your experience?
No, indeed. I see myself in service, but not
that kind of service.
Not kind of service. No, indeed.
Well, involvement in health professions education, just to switch over from public health and from politics, has been a consistent partner to the activities that you've done everywhere. You've had appointments at the University of North Carolina, University of Washington, the Charles R. Drew University, the UCLA, Columbia. You've been president of the alumni from the University of Michigan, and currently you're on the medical faculty at Howard Medical School. What do you see as the needs for health professions overall? Because I know in many of these appointments you were not just in the dental school, in the School of Public Health, now the medical school. You must have a vision for dental or health professions education overall.
Well, common to all of the health professions has to be disease prevention and health promotion. You know, we talk often about the health system. When you really look at it, it's more of a disease treatment system than it is a health system. The product of what we do, for the most part, is successful treatment of disease or adverse conditions. Rarely is the product of what we do a true increment improvement in health. So I try to remind the health community when I have an opportunity, particularly students, that if they are health providers, then they've got to keep in mind that what they're supposed to be doing is delivering health.
And not providing surgical procedures or treatment.
Right. Now, one would argue if someone is ill and they require surgery, they are healthier after the surgery than before. But and there's certainly merit to that. But to be truly effective, we need to be about creating conditions where less surgery is needed in the first place. And you do that by disease prevention and health promotion. So that's one of my messages. The other message is, particularly in the non-oral health academic settings, is that oral health is part of health, and the mouth is part of the body, and that it should not be overlooked. It may be poorly understood, but it should not be overlooked. And so that all health providers have the need and should really have the obligation and the expectation that they know something about oral health.
Well, there's been consistency in how you've approached all aspects of your professional career. I want to turn to professional organizations where you've served as president or member of the board of directors or an active member in so many organizations. I just want to list a few that you've headed and been in the leadership roles. The Washington State Public Health Association, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, United States Conference of Local Health Officers, the U.S.-Mexico Border Health Association, obviously now as president of the American Board for Dental Public Health, the founding member of the Washington State Association of Black Healthcare Professionals, and I'm going to end with the American Public Health Association, where you were president in 1995. But before that, went from leading the oral health section all the way through governing council and many of the other leadership positions. These all put you in the midst of a multidisciplinary, again, environment. And what were some of the contentious issues that you faced as you went through these various professional organizations now?
That's a good
or it doesn't
question.
need to be contentious.
Yeah,
but
I don't really recall things that were so contentious. I think it was always a challenge in those multidisciplinary settings to identify where the points of common ground were. And particularly an organization like the American Public Health Association that's so very diverse, obviously an organization can't satisfy the needs of every one of its components fully. So how do you identify those few items that we all have a stake in, all think are important, and are prepared to go through the give and take of being able to support one item when we have some other items that are not being so actively pursued. And how do you really focus the association's resources and energy down on the few items that you can really have an impact on, recognizing that that's at the stake of a number of items across each organizational entity that may not be so fully addressed.
And APHA definitely is one of the probably most diverse in terms of disciplines as well as positions. Well, going back to Los Angeles, in the midst of a very active career there, you received a call from the Assistant Secretary for Health at the time, Phil Lee. David Satcher was the Surgeon General. asking you to serve as the project director for the first ever Surgeon General's report on oral health. What went through your head at the time you received that call?
Oh boy!
Should I leave the
a lot of things went through my head. I had been in Los Angeles as director of public health programs and services at that point for about 10 years. Right. Had gone through an awful lot, had survived an awful lot, and was happy and comfortable. So when Dr. Lee first approached me, which had really been probably about a year earlier, he had just said in a personal conversation that this might be happening, and if it's so, he'd like to let me know that that's going on, and at some point in time might call and see if I were interested in it. And at that point, I was pleased that he took the time out to mention it to me, but I didn't really put much credence to it. When he called me again, though, about a year later and said, this is really going to happen, we'd really like you to consider it, I began thinking in more detail about what was happening in Los Angeles and realized that I had, in fact, been there 10 years. I had gone through an awful lot. And while I was comfortable, I began to wonder whether or not it really wasn't time for a change. You know, I think I really do believe that it's important for people to change from time to time, and maybe they're climbing the same mountain, but they take a different path. Yeah. And as I thought about it, I said, you know, this might be really a good opportunity to make that change. The other thing that drove me was the realization that this was to be a Surgeon General's report on oral health, that there was only going to be one Surgeon General's report on oral health, certainly in my professional lifetime, and if there was an opportunity for somebody to be involved with it at that level, why not me compared to somebody else? So that's what really began to churn my interest in it, and several years later, here I
the rest
still am.
Is history,
That's right. The rest is history.
You did a wonderful job, and I think the nation is really appreciative of your making that decision.
Oh, that's very kind
because the report has been a success, and you're now actually taking the next steps. Oftentimes, people finish at the initial stage of a project. You're directing the development of the National Oral Health Call to Action. I know it's not out yet, so should we expect any surprises from this call?
I don't know that it's going to be as much surprise as it will be another strong opportunity nationally to focus on oral health and to give out the message that everyone has a role in oral health. And the other message is, again, that oral health is part of the body. That oral health, as I've said in other settings, oral health is not an out-of-body experience. It shouldn't be taught that way. Patients should not view it that way. The care shouldn't be provided that way. It really needs to be integrated, and it needs to be integrated from within the oral health community and from within the rest of the other segments of the health community. I'd like to think anyone who will eventually see the National Oral Health Call to Action when it gets out, they may find some surprises or some elements in there that they personally were not aware of before. And I think that would be just one of the hallmarks of a successful document if that's the case. But I don't think there'll be any shocking surprises for everyone nationally. I think it'll just be a new way of saying some of these things, and hopefully a more effective way.
Well, and it also sort of follows the way that you've overseen other types of initiatives as well, bringing people together within a common setting or umbrella. You've had some extensive and very wonderful honors and awards. I'd like to just mention a few of these. You've been elected to the Institute of Medicine. You're an honorary fellow in the Royal Society of Health, elected to OKU. The first recipient of the Beverly Myers Award for Excellence in Public Health from California, and the inaugural Scholar in Public Health Leadership Institute. And your awards, when I take a look at them, really cover a broad range of topics. Champion of prevention, as you mentioned, health promotion, disease prevention, leadership in cancer, childhood immunization, environmental health. Which of these or any others have been the most special to you, and why?
I think you mentioned it. The Champion of Prevention Award from the Centers for Disease Control was awarded to me when David Satcher was director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and that was sort of in recognition of the work I'd put in on National Public Health Week. And that was particularly nice because that was a difficult work to accomplish. It was something that was over and above the work that I was doing while I was in Los Angeles, but the merits of it quickly became recognized by the American Public Health Association, so they sort of jumped on board. It was just a particularly sweet recognition, so Champion of Prevention really sticks out in my mind.
Well, you also have the Surgeon General's medallion.
Yes, that's true.
I love that.
Yes, that's
probably as aristocratic as this country gets.
Yes, indeed. And we've got that nicely framed at home.
Oh, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, because of your involvement in professional organizations, what would you say to young people who are starting off in their careers and oftentimes really focus on their work at hand about participating in these various activities? What they could benefit from?
Yeah, my advice is they have to be involved. And I think certainly professional organization involvement, any organization, is probably okay. As other organizations become available, then I think it's a matter of really selecting among those and determining which ones go in the direction you want to go in, which ones really serve the interests that you have, and choose them effectively. But also choose them because many of your colleagues, many of your contacts, many of your mentors will come out of those types of organizations, and so you also choose them for who you're going to be, who you'll meet, who you'll be exposed to, what you'll be exposed to. And there's rich opportunity out there because
it enriches their lives as well.
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned Irv Mandel, and you mentioned the orthodontist when you were young. Tell me about other mentors that have made a difference in your life.
Oh,
both distant and personal.
Certainly Irwin Mandel, just because at a time when I felt unsure of the questions that I was asking and how they were being received, he really confirmed that I was on the right path. Right. There was nothing wrong with the questions. What was really wrong was the inability to get them answered effectively. So Irwin is certainly very important. In many regards, although it has not been a close mentoring relation, Cliff Dummett has had a great impact on me, just in terms of his professionalism, his bearing, the model of what he has done has been important to me. But it's not been, although we have talked over the years and been in one another's company over the years in varying settings, it wasn't ever a relation that I would necessarily call him and ask him his advice in terms of, should I do A or B, but just being a role model and being helpful in that context. I think the other person certainly was Dr. Larry Bergner, who was director of the department in Seattle-King County, who first recruited me there as chief of dental services, and then saw in me whatever that was to give me this opportunity to sort of become my own boss and be the division director of the division that was being dismantled, and then ask if I wanted to be a candidate for one of the new divisions, because that's what really helped me transition from the dental public health into general public health, and then from there I went on to Los Angeles. So, and he was always very helpful in terms of guidance and being there to give me some advice and encouragement, and that was always very important.
Well, I think since you raised Cliff Dummett from a distant mentor, that there is a opportunity, leaders like yourself, to be role models to those that you don't even know.
Yes, right.
And I was very impressed with the National Museum of Dentistry's special exhibit on African Americans in dentistry, and seeing your picture there. I think that that will provide a guide to many others that are first considering dentistry, which is a very important part, and then secondly, the pathways they can take. What do you see as some of the opportunities to increase representation in dentistry of underrepresented populations, including African Americans?
Well, that's a very troubling question, and there's no easy answer to it. The number of African Americans is dwindling in health professions generally, and particularly in oral health. Hispanics have been declining, not as much, but also declining. The problems are just multiple. The cost of dental education almost puts it now at a point where only the wealthiest families can consider it, or families who, or students who are prepared to go substantially into debt. The other problem is the visibility of the profession and role models, the kind of experience.
Back to what you had said at Columbia.
Right, and the kinds of experience that I had with this orthodontist, who was black, by the way. I didn't mention that, but those kinds of role model experiences are very subtle, and you don't know when someone is watching you and they are deciding that that's my role model, because they may not tell you.
Right.
But for that to happen, you have to have people who are in those visible places where they can be seen in that way. And to the extent that you don't have them, you miss the opportunities for role modeling. But there's growing concern about that problem, and I have to be optimistic that it's going to be turned around. I wish I could say I had a simple solution to it, but I don't. Yeah.
No, but I know and appreciate the focus that you're placing on it, and we all need to work together to address it. There's no question at all. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your family. I know that you and your wife, Arlene, have a son and a daughter. Right. You want to tell me about your wife and your children?
Well, my family is all, that's what's kept me going. I mean, they've been my point of refuge and my point of strength, particularly when times were difficult. My wife is grand. You know, we have our what's left of our parents living with us. Arlene's father, who is 90. Who will soon be 96.
Oh my goodness.
And my mother, who just turned 91. And up until several months ago, we had Arlene's mother with us as well. She just recently died at 93. So we have the grandparents in the house, and they have a home health aide, so it's some of that burden is off of us. My daughter Whitney is in her second year at University of Michigan and was just home last weekend. So we're seeing a lot more of her than we had particularly planned on. But she's very happy and doing well. And my son is a junior in high school and suffering now, particularly with the strife we have in the area, because the soccer season in high school has all but been canceled. But they are, as we speak, they are on a bus going up to New Jersey, where they will this weekend play in a major game against St. Benedict's school, which is a big challenge. Big challenge. So that's a specialty school that's around soccer. It's a prep school, and all they do is play soccer. But it's a good opportunity for them to play. So home is a
so
great place.
They're still early in their lives. Too early to tell if they're going to follow in either your footsteps or Arlene's footsteps, right?
It's too early to tell. They are, my daughter seems to be interested in the law, but we don't know, and Jared's interests beyond soccer is hard to say right now, but we'll see. It'd be nice if he went into the sciences, if not into oral health.
Well, it'd be very nice. Mm-hmm. I know that.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do to relax?
Oh,
I know that you're a skier.
I'm a skier when we have snow and mountains. I fish. And one of my great hobbies is a collector of old trains, a collector and operator of old trains. I actually play with my trains.
I like
so,
that.
So yes. So I have my own little train world. That's right. I have my own little train world. So I do those kinds of things and read and other kinds.
And music.
And music. Yeah, we have quite a musical family, particularly the children, because they play a lot of different instruments.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go back into dentistry. You have now seen dentistry from all positions, as part of a health department, obviously as a national initiative, as a patient when you were young, and now as we grow older. What is your vision for the future of dentistry here in the United States, but also globally? Because I know you have been very active internationally as well.
I think the first thing that really has to take better root, and I guess that's a pun intended,
yes.
Is that oral health is not strictly in the province of dentistry as we know it. That oral health is part of overall health. That just as there are specialty interests and skills and capacity representing other areas of the body, that there's necessarily expertise when it comes to oral health, but that oral health is not the sole province of this area of expertise. We've missed that. And there has been an unfortunate line of demarcation drawn such that oral health now it appears to be viewed as the sole province of dentists. And I think the profession has suffered as a result of that. I think health in general is weaker because of it. And I would go so far as to say that the public's health has not benefited by that. I think there needs to be greater integration. For that to occur, the oral health community has got to be a better partner than it has been in the past,
right.
And the rest of the health community has got to be prepared to embrace the oral health community as a partner. But I think oral health has to be at the table. It has to be at the health table. It can't be just at the oral health table. It has to be at the health table. So I think that's one of the great challenges for the future, but that also is part of what the Surgeon General's report on oral health is about. That's part of what the National Oral Health Call to Action is about, to get that type of message out nationally.
Thank you. I know that you've been working very hard in that interface between public health and dentistry, as you have between public health and medicine as well. Can you give us a sneak preview of what the future holds for Dr. Caswell Evans?
That sometimes becomes difficult because as my career has evolved, I haven't always done it with a sense of an a priori sense as to where I want to go next. Those types of things very much unfolded. I'm certainly committed to what we're doing with the National Oral Health Call to Action, and that will take another couple of years to fully unfold. After that, I think, to me, one of the challenges will be what will we do in education.
Right.
I really think that part of what we have to do is create a new type of oral health professional. Whether that is in dental schools as we currently know them, or whether that's in a new type of educational environment that's being created. As we all are, we're very curious about the development of the new dental school in Arizona,
right.
For example. That may be just the first step along the line of other steps of new conceptual approaches at the academic level to teaching oral health. But it seems to me that we need a different type of provider, a different type of trained oral health expertise for the future than what we have currently or have had in the past. So that's about as close as I can come to that.
Well, but I think you're obviously putting a lot of thought behind that, and I'm sure we'll be leading some initiatives like that in the future. We're coming to the close of our discussion here,
so soon.
Conversation. It's gone by very quickly. Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we close?
Well, I think that we have to view the future with a great deal of anticipation and optimism because I think the opportunities are great for far better outcomes in oral health. I think about our situation with oral cancer, for example.
Right.
Where we know the behaviors, we know the practices that are so predominantly contributory to oral cancer. I'd like to think that we can do a far better job of preventing these types of disease outcomes, and so for that you have a sense of optimism. I see in the future oral health being more integrated into general health, viewed as a more serious partner and a contributor towards overall health, and that's something to smile about.
Well, you've given me a lot to smile about, and I want to thank you very much for your gracious time. We will be putting this video in the National Museum of Dentistry. And thank you again, Dr. Evans.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kleinman, for having me on. I very much appreciate this. It's been a wonderful way to spend my time this morning.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good.